You washed up loser lawyer. You're not even a lawyer. Those words came from Pam Bondi, the Attorney General of the United States, directed at Jamie Raskin, a constitutional law professor who taught at American University for 25 years. Not in a hallway, not on social media, in the House Judiciary Committee hearing room, on camera, on the record. But before Bondi lost control and launched that insult, Raskin had already done something far more damaging. He told the Attorney General exactly what she had turned the Department of Justice into, and what he said made every camera in the room lock onto Bondi's face. Watch this video until the end, because what happened in that hearing wasn't just an argument. It was a constitutional law professor systematically dismantling the nation's top law enforcement officer using her own department's action. If you're new here, subscribe right now, because this is what accountability looks like when someone actually comes prepared. Jamie Raskin walked into that hearing room with a warning. He looked directly at Bondi before the questioning even started and said, "We ask you politely but firmly, please do not waste 1 second of our precious time." He told her to give direct answers, no filibustering, no running out the clock. "We saw your performance in the Senate," Raskin said. "We're not going to accept that. This isn't a game." That was the first signal. Raskin had watched Bondi's Senate testimony. He had studied it. He knew every trick she used, the deflections, the personal attack, the tangents designed to eat up a member's 5 minutes. He wasn't going to let it happen again. Then Raskin went straight for the throat. "You've turned the People's Department of Justice into Trump's instrument of revenge," he said. "Trump orders up prosecutions like pizza, and you deliver every time." He laid out the evidence. James Comey investigated. Letitia James, the New York Attorney General, prosecuted. Jerome Powell, the head of the Federal Reserve, investigated. Adam Schiff, a sitting United States senator, investigated. 6 Democratic lawmakers who appeared in a video telling military members not to follow unlawful orders charged. But here's the detail that made it devastating. The grand jury in the case against those 6 lawmakers had just refused to indict them the day before the hearing. The Justice Department tried to prosecute sitting members of Congress for a social media video, and a grand jury said no. Raskin had that timing in his back pocket, and he used it. Bondi's response wasn't to address the prosecutions. It wasn't to explain the legal basis. It wasn't to defend the Department of Justice's independence. She attacked Raskin personally. That's when she called him a washed-up loser lawyer. Raskin didn't flinch. He fired back. "I did tell you because we saw what you did in the Senate, but the insult revealed something. When the Attorney General of the United States responds to a constitutional argument with a personal attack, it means she has no constitutional argument. I need to stop here. If you've made it this far, please like this video, because what Raskin exposed next, the DOJ spying on members of Congress reviewing the Epstein files, is something that made both Democrats and Republicans demand answers. And leave your thoughts in the comment. When the nation's top prosecutor calls a constitutional law professor a washed-up loser lawyer instead of answering his question, what does that tell you? I am very curious about your thoughts. Here's what happened next, and this is where it gets truly disturbing. During the hearing, a Reuters photographer captured something in Bondi's binder, a page clearly visible. It read, "Jayapal Pramila Search History." Below that title was a detailed list of every document that Representative Pramila Jayapal had searched for when she reviewed the unredacted Epstein files at the Department of Justice. Every single search, logged, printed. She put into Bondi's hearing preparation binder. Here's the context. The Department of Justice had set up a system for members of Congress to review the less redacted Epstein file. Members had to physically travel to a DOJ annex. They had to sit at one of 4 DOJ-owned computers. They had to use a clunky software system provided by the DOJ, and DOJ staffers watched over their shoulders the entire time. Raskin called it the perfect setup for DOJ to spy on members' review, monitoring, recording, and logging every document they chose to pull up. And the photograph of Bondi's binder proved they weren't just logging searches for security. They were printing those searches out and putting them in the Attorney General's burn book to use as ammunition congressional hearing. Raskin's response was immediate. "Oh, it is an outrage that DOJ is tracking members' investigative steps," he said. "This is just getting Orwellian with these people." He demanded the DOJ Inspector General open an investigation. He demanded demanded the department immediately stop tracking lawmakers' searches. He demanded all Epstein files be publicly released with only survivor information redacted. And he wasn't alone. Even Republican Nancy Mace confirmed the practice. She said the DOJ is tagging all documents searched and reviewed by lawmakers. Based on how I confirmed this, there are timestamps associated with this tracking, she wrote. House Speaker Mike Johnson called it inappropriate. Senator Richard Blumenthal called it unconstitutional. This wasn't a partisan reaction. This was both sides of the aisle saying what the Department of Justice did crossed a line. But Bondi wasn't done. During the same hearing, Representative Pramila Jayapal asked Bondi to turn around. Behind Bondi, seated in the hearing room, were 11 Epstein survivors, women who had been trafficked, women whose names, addresses, and phone numbers had been exposed in the DOJ's botched release of the Epstein files, women who were now receiving death threats because of that exposure. Jayapal asked Bondi a simple question: will you turn to them now and apologize for what your Department of Justice has put them through? Bondi's answer: I'm not going to get in the gutter with this woman doing theatrics. She called an apology to trafficking survivors theatrics. Jayapal then asked the survivors to raise their hands if they had ever been invited to meet with the Attorney General or anyone at the DOJ. Every single survivor raised their hand. Not one had been contacted. Representative Ted Lieu put it plainly: there are over 1,000 sex trafficking victims, and you have not held a single man accountable. Shame on you. If you had any decency, you would resign right after this hearing concludes. Bondi didn't respond to that. She couldn't, because the numbers speak for themselves. Over 1,000 victims identified across the Epstein file. 0 new indictments against co-conspirators. 0. Not one person held accountable beyond Epstein, who is dead, and Ghislaine Maxwell, who was convicted under the previous administration. And it wasn't just Democrats she attacked. Republican Thomas Massie of Kentucky, who co-authored the bill that required the DOJ to release the Epstein files in the first place, pressed Bondi on the over-redacted documents. Bondi's response to a member of her own party: this guy has Trump derangement syndrome. He needs to. You're a failed politician. A Republican who wrote the law. Being called a failed politician with Trump derangement syndrome by the Attorney General for asking why the DOJ redacted names of powerful people while leaving survivors' information exposed. The aftermath has been swift. Congresswoman Summer Lee filed articles of impeachment against Bondi. The charges include defiance of congressional subpoenas, politicization of the Department of Justice, firing career prosecutors, ordering politically motivated investigations, closing investigations involving Trump and his allies, and targeting journalists and protesters. The House Oversight Committee voted to subpoena Bondi for a deposition on the Epstein investigation. When she was asked at a closed-door briefing whether she would comply, Bondi said she would follow the law. She would not say yes. Representative Robert Garcia called it infuriating and part of a White House cover. Every Democrat on the committee walked out of that briefing. Jamie Raskin destroyed Pam Bondi with facts she couldn't dispute. Raskin's charge: you turned the DOJ into Trump's instrument of revenge. Trump orders up prosecutions like pizza, and you deliver. The evidence: Comey investigated. Letitia James prosecuted. Powell investigated. 6 lawmakers charged. Grand jury refused to indict. Bondi's response: you washed up, loser lawyer. Raskin's exposure: DOJ tracked lawmakers' Epstein file search. Bondi had search histories in her burn book binder. Bondi to Epstein survivors: refused to look at them, refused to apologize, called the request theatric. Bondi to Republican Massie: Trump derangement syndrome, failed politician. Result: impeachment articles filed, subpoena issued. Bondi won't commit to testify under oath. If you watch this video, share it. This is an attorney general who called a constitutional law professor a washed-up loser, spied on Congress, refused to apologize to trafficking survivors, and attacked a Republican from her own side for asking about redacted names. Subscribe. The subpoena deposition is scheduled for April 14th. Bondi still hasn't said whether she'll show up. I'll cover every development. You turn the DOJ into Trump's revenge machine. Trump orders up prosecutions like pizza, and you deliver. That line will define this hearing, because when you respond to that accusation with a personal insult instead of a legal argument, you've already lost. And today, Pam Bondi didn't just lose the argument. She proved Raskin's point for him. Make of that what you will.